Wu, nice to see you.
Great to see you both.
Thank you very much for coming, Madam Mayor. So, when something, another one of these horrific mass shootings happens in Australia, and then we had much closer to home at Brown University down in Providence, what does this mean for you as the mayor of Boston? Do you have to do something to coordinate with the cops, or what do you do?
What a world we live in when you can't even get time to process one horrific act before the next incident of violence has happened. And we, even when it's not directly in the city of Boston, there's always worry about whether any large-scale event that any city is then hosting will be safe and will feel secure for everyone. So, when we hear about news like that, immediately there's communication with our local community members. For example, there were several menorah lightings that took place later that day.
Oh.
After the Hanukkah celebration was shattered at Bondi Beach in Sydney. And so there was a lot of support around making sure that there was significant visibility for all of our community members celebrating Hanukkah together and coordinating with other faith communities around the city as well. And when it comes to Brown, both at the state level between governors and at the city level, I know there's been direct communication to ensure that if they need anything from us, our law enforcement resources, our communities are ready to support and partner.
Marjorie, and you mentioned two of the horrors of the weekend. The third, of course, was what apparently was done by the son of Rob Reiner and his wife. I'm assuming you've seen the Truth Social post and the comments the President of the United States has made about Reiner. What was your reaction to that, Mayor Wu?
It's just a mix of shock somehow and disgust and just utter sadness that what should be a post of leadership and making change and directing federal resources to improve people's lives is being used to further rip apart the fabric of our community, to foment violence and almost cheer it on if it applies to the right people who have a different ideology or background or country of origin from yourself. It's I was just in Faneuil Hall earlier this morning, and we reflected a little bit about the citizenship ceremony that had been, again, disrupted and devastating for so many who had done everything right, taken every step in a complicated process, and then were pulled out of line because at the very last step, the commander-in-chief decided that their countries of origin were quote-unquote high risk, and so they should not be allowed even to finish the formal celebration that everyone was all dressed up for. It's anti-American. It cuts against the very values of our humanity and morality. And as we enter the next year, reminding the country of where we started and how Boston kicked off the conversations that the Founding Fathers used to envision a country where you didn't have to be from a particular cultural lineage or a certain kind of background. We have more work to do towards that more perfect union every day, but this is shockingly degrading to our democracy day by day.
Talking to Mayor Michelle Wu. She'll take your calls and questions in a minute at 877-301-8970. The last time we talked to you about the situation with the soccer stadium in Everett was several months ago. And best I recall, the Kraft family, who were building the soccer stadium, had offered the city $750,000, which compares to the $80 million, I think, that Encore, when the casino, is that the right number? Gave $67 million or whatever. My understanding, if I remember correctly, is there's alleged mediation through the end of the year, and if the mediation doesn't come to closure for both sides, then there's binding arbitration in January. Is this going to end up in binding arbitration?
We are in mediation now, and Tom Glynn, who's a very well-respected leader who has the full context of how to make big things happen and find common ground, has been part of that. There has been some parameters set to that process around confidentiality, so I can't share everything that's been happening, but I will just say that $750,000 is not acceptable as any part of from the starting point to where we are now in the process, and I hope that we will come out of this with a respectful and appropriate way to bring new economic development, to create new opportunities for the region to benefit, and with the appropriate mitigation to acknowledge all the impacts that will have on the city of Boston and our residents.
I'm sort of surprised to hear it's still at 750,000. Do you think? Do you find the Kraft family to be dealing in good faith, or do you think there's some residual ill will from the campaign?
I mean, I think what happened through the campaign ended up pretty clear, and it's past us, and the city of Boston spoke resoundingly. So I hope that there's nothing tied to that. But even regardless of individual political feelings or motivations, we're talking about a mega project for the region that would have real impact, and I believe would have real benefit for all of us if we can get it right. But what we cannot do is just accept pennies for residents who will be absorbing a real serious change in quality of life and transportation and impact and safety for people who are in that area. So we have laid out what the city of Boston needs. We have been in communication with surrounding communities as well, and I think there's clear alignment that this could be a great thing for the region if we can ensure that the transportation infrastructure, that the safety and other community mitigation is done properly.
So are the Crafts negotiating in good faith? Forget history. Are they negotiating in good faith in your estimation?
I think it's too soon to point to any evidence.
To point to any evidence that they are?
I hope in a couple weeks I will be able to answer that question.
Okay. Talking to Mayor Wu.
877-301-8970 is the number to call or text to get to ask a question of Mayor Wu. Jessica in Boston, you are first. Thanks for calling.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, my name is Jess, and I'm calling from Dorchester. I'm a BPS parent. Tomorrow, the school committee is voting on some closures of several schools, including the Henderson Inclusion High School and Transition Program, as well as other high schools with inclusive programming for high schools that are up for closure. Sorry, that's a little redundant. These inclusion schools are not to be confused with the underfunded, understaffed citywide version of inclusion that is not even completely rolled out at the BPS high schools. If the vote is approved, there's no plan for these students. As a parent of a child with special needs, this feels incredibly short-sighted and negligent. My question is, how is this equitable? How is it inclusive to not offer smaller school environments as an option, as this is often the most appropriate setting for our special needs students? And how can this be approved when there is no transition plan for inclusive spaces for these students?
Jessica, thanks for your call.
So thank you, Jess, for being part of the district and for advocating for your child and for our students who have disabilities and need to have every opportunity and support made available to them. I would just respectively push back that the reason why we have mapped out the process for getting to the right BPS school footprint over a number of years rather than, for example, trying to put everything on the table at once or rip off the Band-Aid in this way or the other way, is that it's actually precisely so that every single student has a guarantee that they will be, if faced with any disruption or change through mergers, consolidations, closures, that they will know that there's a better, high-quality experience on the other end of that. What we had seen in the district in previous years is closures for budget reasons or closures that happened very quickly, and then students ended up being shuffled around to a different placement that actually wasn't better at meeting their needs and caused disruption without benefit on the other end. The timing of this proposal, the creation of several programs that added more seats, particularly for students with disabilities, before moving to a proposal for closures in this case, that has all been meant to create the infrastructure so that every single student can have the right supports at the right time of year within the enrollment and registration process to have individualized support and feedback about where their next placement will be. So you can be sure that if this moves forward, your family and your child will have a one-on-one opportunity to understand what all the options are and to have priority in the enrollment process in getting to the right placement. We have heard feedback for a long time about how inclusion needs to happen and it has to be district-wide. It has to be done at every single school. We need a range of options to meet the varying needs of all of our students and all of our families. But what we see is that when there are schools that are consistently under-enrolled or schools that are in a too tiny footprint, they're simply not able to offer the experience that we hear from communities as a baseline that every single high schooler or elementary school student needs and deserves. And so I know the school committee is weighing this very seriously. And there's also been 3+ years of hearing from communities on what those standards should be and then putting in place the pieces to be able to make tough decisions to get us there.
Jess, good luck. Thank you very much for your question. 877-301-8970.
You know, Mayor, you have spent considerable effort trying to get the legislature to change the way taxes are, the way the financial district is taxed, way citizens in Boston are taxed, but I don't think you've gotten anywhere with the legislature, so you've had to set the 2026 property tax rates in Boston, and they're going to go up. Tell us what happened.
Tax bills will go out in January. And so if the legislature does not act between now and then, bills will go out at an average increase for single-family homeowners of an additional 13% increase compared to the year before, annualized. Of course, the first bill that you get when the new rates go into effect are doubled.
Let's, if we can continue.
Okay, let me finish this answer and we can go to that topic too. I'm not sure exactly the topic, but the bill is actually doubled up in the last half of the fiscal year. So the January bill will actually be a 26% increase compared to the last quarterly bill that was received, and then it gets evened out to a 13% average across the year. For many families, they will have even higher than 13% because we know that those without a residential exemption, if they are having those taxes passed on from their landlords as renters, or those who are above the average, will end up having just unsustainable increases. And so we've continued, this has been 2 years now almost that we have put forward a proposal that is common sense, balanced, worked in Boston before when it was implemented in 2004. And this is a solution that we have never even gotten a vote on. So at a time when we're trying to strengthen our democracy here at home, the very least thing that should happen is proposals that have been vetted for nearly 2 years should be allowed to come to the floor for a vote.
And there are a couple of Boston senators who, I don't know if is it fair to say you are either running candidates against in primaries or will support candidates running against them, Brownsberger and Collins?
I have not gotten involved in any of the 2026 races for those two districts.
You haven't talked to the staff person who's running against Brownsberger?
Oh, of course. I've had conversations with candidates in both of those races now, but I haven't made an endorsement or haven't made an official step to support. I do know that there's neither of these candidates, in both cases, there are candidates who are running to challenge incumbents who are not running because I asked them to or because I had a conversation with them prior to their desire to run. I think there's pent-up energy that something has to give, and that if we've been at it and we see across the country that we need to figure out affordability. And if the Democratic Party is going to be successful and keep moving in the right direction, at the very least in Massachusetts, we have to be the example of that. And so I think there's, I would say, a lot of valid and understandable frustration and anger at the pace of, or even the lack of a vote at all on this measure and other measures for affordability, and look forward to engaging more with anyone who is hoping to serve as we move into the election process.
The headline on Joan Vernacchi's column in the Boston Globe says, "The Boston tax fight, is it personal between Wu and Spilka?" And of course, that would be Karen Spilka, who's the Senate president. Is it personal between you and Karen Spilka?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly not on my part. It's just, I will just observe this. It is such a tired narrative that whenever there are two women leaders, the first thing that people go to all the time is, oh, it must be personality or a catfight or this or that or the other. There's a difference in opinion here. And there's a difference in district. There's a difference in pace and urgency to address the needs of the city of Boston. And what I know and what I hear from municipalities across the Commonwealth, there are a lot of cities who are in a similar crunch right now. And because of how rigid and inflexible state tax laws are, unlike the authorities that cities around the country have to set their own tax rates and manage the balance between different sectors, we have to go ask the entire state legislature for permission to even make small tweaks on the scale of a few percentage points here or there in the shift ratio. And so we have our Boston delegation with the state legislature. We operate through our representatives our Boston-based representatives on the House side and on the Senate side. And we have been pushing for 2 years now with a proposal that has been overwhelmingly passed by the Boston City Council and supported by our residents, overwhelmingly passed by the House of Representatives and supported by those members too.
So last year, before the Senate did nothing the first time or the second time, whatever it was, you said something on our show like, if it turns out the Senate doesn't deal with this in the way that the elected leaders of Boston, I'm paraphrasing, want, you'll make it clear to everybody in Boston the Senate's responsible for the property tax increase. Is that your attitude in 2025 as well?
But for Senator Nick Collins blocking the proposal from a vote on the Senate floor last year at this time, 3 times in a row, I believe we would have saved residents hundreds of dollars in their property taxes last year, and it was a multi-year proposal, so we would not be having this conversation this year either. We are in a moment of economic transition. We need the flexibility to protect our residents, and this was vetted and passed at every other step except for that last one.
Who's the obstacle? Is it Collins and Brownsburger who you see as the obstacles in 2025?
Both of whom represent parts of
Parts of
Boston.
Boston,
Yeah,
of
I mean,
course.
both have said that they are opposed to the measure to this day. I believe Senator Brownsburger, in conversations with me and with constituents, as he has been saying in recent days, continues to say that it is because he believes Boston residents pay too little in taxes to begin with. That in Belmont and other parts of his district, people pay more taxes. I mean, I don't know what to say if the goal is to ensure that we are keeping Boston and the greater Boston region competitive and trying to address housing costs and working furiously to build more housing, to bring prices down. Here's something that doesn't require the timeline of new cranes going up in the sky and city permitting and construction processes. It's about keeping people in their homes, particularly our seniors who are living on a fixed income and who bought their homes at a time before property values skyrocketed and are now struggling to pay the taxes just to remain in the communities that they've built. This is about who you stand with. Do you stand with residents who are already being stretched and pushed under these horrible federal policies and affordability that is more and more out of reach? Or do you stand with corporations who want a bigger tax break than they're already getting just by a fraction that they wouldn't even notice? And we've been told over and over again is about, quote unquote, optics in a moment where we need to focus on stability and ensuring people can stay in our community.
Very quickly, on a related note, when you were here last month, you said you would welcome the legislature repealing Prop 2.5. When you've spoken to other local leaders, have you gotten a reaction to your comment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to be clear because I think I just gave a yes or no and probably should have added more context to begin with. Prop 2.5 was enacted 45 or so years ago at this point. We are in a very different period now with inflation far higher than 2.5% every single year and exacerbated by the macroeconomic climate that we're in. Do I believe, it's now been painted that if you're against Prop 2.5, that means you must be for unlimited taxes, all the time on everyone. That is certainly not what I was saying. We need stability. We need predictability to our tax system and to our economy. And that is, in fact, why we're proposing this tax shift, which stabilizes the spike on residents against the dramatic drop on the commercial side. But what we do need is for Prop 2.5 to be, if not fully rewritten, examined for the places that the rigidity of it prevents cities from being able to carry out city services and protect their residents.
Okay, Mayor Wu is with us until the top of the hour, taking our questions. It's yours at 877-301-8970. I believe we have Kate at the Boston Public Library. Microphone has a question about White Stadium.
Hey, Kate. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you, Mayor Wu.
Good to see you.
I'm a little curious. You've been speaking both about wanting to protect the Boston taxpayers from overspending and insisting that the Kraft family needs to address all these issues about transportation and pressure and how much is being invested for the people of Everett. We have had a campaign.
And the people of Charlestown, I will say. Because, in fact, the
We have
transportation
had a
runs through
campaign,
Charlestown.
thank you. We have had a campaign, and only once have you ever shown an interest in the demands and the needs and the requests of the people of Jamaica Plain, Roxbury, Mattapan, around the question of a private soccer franchise being given the rights to a Boston public school property in White Stadium.
Kate, what's
Do
your
you have a
question?
question?
My question is, if you want to save some money and rebuild the stadium for the Boston Public Schools and the people of Boston and save some money, why not have a fully public option to rebuild White Stadium, not for the design for an 11,000-seat stadium, which will bring hundreds of thousands of people into crammed streets? Why don't you ask the people of Boston what they want in rebuilding White Stadium and go for a $60 million fully public option for White Stadium?
Kate, thanks for your
Thank
question.
And may I
Mayor?
ask for one
I'm sorry.
clarification, Kate? Sorry, you said I've only once paid attention. Can you tell me what time that was, just so I know
There
sort
was
of what you mean?
public, can I have the mic back? There was a public meeting at the Trotter School over a year ago, which was the only face-to-face meeting that was held with the people of that area. And there was maybe 2 people who supported this plan. It was overwhelmingly and
got it.
angrily
Got it.
in
Okay.
Got it.
opposition.
Thank you.
I
Mayor
hear you.
Wu.
Thank you. Well, okay, so I hear several different threads that I want to try to very quickly address. One on process and listening and what the general public consensus has been. One on spending and budget. One on usage of the stadium and who actually will benefit from it and who will use it. And then the trade-offs sort of in each of those areas. So on process, we held more than 60 public meetings. That was one of them. But I personally attended dozens of meetings, whether at the Franklin Park Clubhouse or at neighborhood associations. I did join the Jamaica Hills Neighborhood Association by Zoom because their meetings have been virtual, but was at meetings in Roxbury, in Dorchester, and Jamaica Plain in person throughout a 2-year process. And my team was at many, many more than I was at as well. We partnered very closely with the Franklin Park Coalition, who also conducted additional surveys that found the majority of park users, of 700 people who responded to their survey, supported the project and certainly wanted to make sure that it would have the right mitigation and transportation access and all of that, but wanted to see it move forward. There were then also public surveys conducted as part of polling citywide that also found a majority support for the project over the last year or so. Now, we have to get details right. That is the beauty and the challenge of city government. And so the way that the mitigation process has gone has been very different from the Everett Stadium. First, just on safety and transportation infrastructure. In Everett, we're talking about a stadium that will not have parking on site. There's 75 parking spots, they say, that will be on site. Everyone will empty over into Sullivan Square and that Orange Line T station in Charlestown, a mile away across the Alfred Street Bridge, which is so dangerous and not built for pedestrians that someone was killed by a vehicular crash not too long ago there. Franklin Park and White Stadium is an existing stadium that already had 10,000 seats in the middle of a public park where you can't imagine a safer walking experience than through 500 acres of public park to get to somewhere. We have a transportation access and a TAPA plan that solidifies legally the commitments that on game days the team will be making for where the shuttle routes and the circulation will go, so it's not burdening one neighborhood over another. There have been additional investments that will be made for drainage, for walking paths, for the experience through the park as well, that all have been very carefully negotiated. The lease, which I encourage you to read, it's on the city website, or you've already read it, so you'll know that it includes very, very specific commitments that the park will be open, the stadium will be open far more hours, 7 days a week than it ever had been under the pre-existing condition, that the usage will be guaranteed first priority for large-scale community events that have always happened, like BAMS Fest, Puerto Rican Festival, other big cultural annual events. Second priority for Boston Public School students to be used. It is legally binding. I know you're shaking your head. It is legally binding in the documents of the lease. And so this is going to be a project that takes an existing stadium that was run down, and for 40 years, 4 different administrations had tried to come up with a way to renovate. And I've spoken with people who chaired various city council committees along the way, who were in the budget office along the way. It was tried to come up with any means of renovating and getting the stadium up and running. We have a partnership now that will use less than 10% of the playable hours of the field for those professional soccer game days, and they will commit to more than half the construction costs, the entirety of the maintenance costs, the entirety of the operational costs of the facility moving forward, and it will be open 16 hours a day for every single day of the year, and then on up to 20 days, if they make the playoffs, up to 20 days a year, the evenings will be for a professional soccer game, while we still have the full morning for track meet or other events that we have not been able to host because the facility has been so run down in the decades before.
Mayor Wu, just before we take a break, just staying on White Stadium for a second, you originally had said that you were hoping to have a final estimate on what the cost of the city would be earlier in the year and then by the end of the year, and now you've moved it into early next year because there's still some contracts outstanding. Is that what it
So
is?
the last chunk of bids went out in October, and by the state construction laws and the timelines that you have to hold open for respondents to an RFP, a request for proposals, et cetera, we will get those bids back in January. So we are working as quickly as we can, but we will know once the bidder and the amount that they bid has been selected. The biggest cost escalation has been in the cost of steel, and so we will see what the market comes back with.
Last thing, though, this is actually from a couple of texters. We're quoting you from our show, speaking of cost escalation. You said in response to a question from us a number of months ago, the city will bear its share of this, quote, no matter what it costs. The next day, you clarified by saying there's no blank check. But if the cost does escalate well beyond what the expectation was, if the city is not on the line for the bill, who would pay it? The soccer team's not going to pay additional money, are they, or are they?
The way the lease is structured, the facility itself is divided into 2 halves, and any part of the facility that has technical specifications that are above what we would have required for a high school level stadium, for example, professional level sound systems or seats in the bleachers that are professional grade versus the bleachers that we had before, the team is assuming all of those costs. So the city is not paying for any spaces that a professional team would use or would require to be of a sort of additional cost add compared to what it would have been. We are paying for the spaces that are the student training and strength and conditioning areas, or the coaches' offices for Boston Public Schools athletics, or the community space and the banquet hall that are being built there now, the study spaces. So those are the city and Boston Public Schools' responsibility. We will know in January what or we will know when the bids come back and they're selected, what the cost will be.
But in those areas where it's a school, and last thing, and then we'll take a break, and the cities, it is true that no matter what it costs, the city is going to meet those expense demands, correct?
So let me put it this way. The city undergoes construction projects frequently for libraries or parks or community centers or White Stadium, and it happens according to state construction and bidding laws every single time. As a public entity, we do not get to say, here is the cost that we're willing to pay, and we are going to make sure that our workers' stick to that cost by cutting corners on union benefits or this or that or the other. We design the specifications of any building or structure, and then we have to go out to public bid to see what the work will be, the cost of the work will be to get that done. And so it's public sector procurement and bidding as it relates to construction. And this is how the process works for every project that we have. If you go over to White Stadium, as I was just there a couple days ago, the structure is gone. Right? We are already under construction, and so there's a facade remaining of the one side of the grandstand that will be retained. It's part of the historic preservation, and it's beautiful, and I'm so glad that we're keeping that in the new building. The foundation, the surface has been fully graded, so it is smooth. The site work has been done, the excavation and demolition and all of that. And this last set of bids is for the vertical construction of the structures that will go on top of it.
Fair enough. You appear to be bearing a cake. Is that true?
It's a box of pastries from Bono in East Boston, who are one of our scale grant recipients. And so this is a program that was created to help businesses scale up and bid on public contracts. And so I think it's tres leches, dulce de leche, etc.
Ooh.
I would pass it in her direction, if you know what I mean.
I'm a big pastry person
Thank
over
you,
here.
Mayor
You're giving
Wu.
it to the
Very
right
kind.
person. I'll go through this very carefully. Thank you very much.
Bless
So, talking about spending a lot of money, I guess the $700 million Madison Park School has gotten the support from the state, but it is going to be very, very expensive. Why is it going to be so expensive, and why is it worth it for the city of Boston?
Look, and this relates a little bit to the White Stadium conversation too. Today, unfortunately, it costs a lot to build anything. And that is a large part of the problem, why we need to focus on getting more housing going, because the economics are very tricky. We built a pool, just a pool in Charlestown a couple years ago, and it was $40 million just for the shell of a pool outside.
Oh.
The most recent number that we saw from, I think, Lexington's new high school is going to be $660 million for a new high school. A vocational high school is always even more expensive because you're building out specific spaces for whether it's the shop and all the trades and the kinds of technical equipment that need to be in there, or life sciences track, or whatever other spaces they end up needing even more cost per square foot to get them done. And this would not be possible without the partnership of the state. Now that we've been officially selected by the Mass School Building Authority, it changes the game, and I'm really, really excited to get going on the design process.
We're both huge fans of vocational ed. That's great. Marjorie's trying to open the box of pastries.
I will open it. Yes, I will.
Unsuccessfully.
Jay in Jamaica Plain, meanwhile, he's on the phone. Thank you for calling.
Jay, how are you?
Hi, thanks for taking my question, Mayor Wu. I'm calling regarding snow removal, and the reason I'm doing that is because in Jamaica Plain at the library on this corner of South Street and Sedgwick Street, there's still a bunch of ice on the sidewalk. And I did run into this about a year or two ago. I put in a 311, and the reply when the case was closed was that a fine was assessed. This is a city-owned property. What, did they find themselves? So additionally, over at the South Street Mall, at the corner of Carolina and South Street, there's still a bunch of ice there. So I also put in a 311. So why do we, the homeowners of Boston, need to clear our walks of ice and snow within 3 hours after a storm, but the city-owned properties don't have to hold up the same standards?
We absolutely do need to hold up the same standards, which is actually why we do, and it sounds funny, but we do fine ourselves just to ensure that there's accountability for documenting the work that needs to be done faster and better. So I will make sure, I know my team is listening as well, so we will make sure that this spot is cleared and that we help. I want to thank the president of the Boston Public Library is gesturing and
Hello,
sending
David
a message
Leonard.
into his phone right now. Thank you, Mr. President, for all that you do. They not only have to make sure that the collections and patrons are taken care of, they're also, have to manage their property too, and we support that throughout all of our city departments. So we'll take a look and figure out how to make sure that this area doesn't become an ongoing problem.
You know, Mayor Wu,
Thank
after...
you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jay, thank you much for the call and the question. One of the oddest meetings I've ever seen, I only saw it on television, was a meeting between the mayor-elect of New York City, Mamdani, and the president. And it sort of a love fest in a lot of ways, I think you would argue. You were asked, and I apologize for not crediting whoever asked, I just don't remember. You were asked if you would welcome a similar meeting, and let me paraphrase your response and tell me if this is accurate, that you're not interested in a meeting unless there were certain conditions met, including stopping, snatching people from off the street, that kind of thing. You weren't interested in a, quote, bromance. And Mamdani is, believe he said his model for sitting mayors was you, actually, but obviously he didn't take your advice on that one. Have you spoken to him since you made your comment?
A little bit, yeah.
How was that?
It was fine. I mean, every city has its own unique context, and every leader has to make their own decision right now about how we handle the challenges of this moment, most of which are unnecessary and being provoked by a federal administration that is trying to use every possible way to divide people, to intimidate, and to isolate everyone. And whether you are the head of, whether you're the mayor of a city or the head of a university or a law firm, your decisions also impact other folks who aren't directly part of that world as well. And I think when you study history, you see that authoritarians thrive on fear and the silence that emboldens. And when you set up a dynamic where the way to protect yourself in one moment is through flattery or trying to trade off some compliance for a better deal, it just ends up impacting other communities as well. And so I do not criticize any other leader for what the impossible decisions that everyone is having to make and how they best protect their own communities and the unique circumstances that all those of us watching from the outside cannot begin to really understand and evaluate. But what I said and what I continue to believe is that I know from being in direct contact constantly with communities in Boston who are most directly targeted over and over and over again, that we are not a community that believes in silence, that believes in trying to comply in advance or putting in the flattery to provide a little bit of potentially short-term relief. We are going to fight the fights that are necessary and stand up for who we are as a community, the values that we hold, and that can be unpopular, but that is the only way to constantly draw attention to the outrages of how far we have fallen from basic standards of democracy, of morals, of humanity, and just normalizing that or going along with it or cutting a deal is not in the DNA of our city.
Thank you.
Mayor Wu, there's been a little controversy over this church in Dedham, this St. Susanna's Church. The Reverend there he's protested many things over the years. And this season, his nativity scene, if people don't know, they've removed Jesus, Mary, and Joseph from the nativity scene and replaced it with a sign, ICE was here, and then they have a phone number that people can call if they have seen ICE in the neighborhood. It's his protest for what has happened in separation of families by ICE. The cardinal, I guess, doesn't think this is such a great idea. They agreed to discuss it. But what do you think about this? You think the cardinal's right, or you think the guy, the Reverend Stephen Joseph, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is correct to protest?
Well, I have enough to try to think about the nuances of leading a city. I won't get into the archdiocese and all of the policies and protocols that have to be there. We have our nativity scene set up in our home, and I think regardless of what ends up happening with that particular sign and the conversations with the parish and the archdiocese in general, it's a powerful reminder that often the figures that some folks are lifting up all the time, right, when they say they're acting from a certain, Judeo-Christian, righteous way of excluding others, in fact, that scene was about people who were refugees, people who were homeless, people who, have now been the foundation of so much of how we talk about our values and morals and our very faith. But we lose track of we lose sight of the fact that the very things we are demonizing right now or dehumanizing in national politics, just open the book, go back and, line by line in the Bible, and lays it out pretty clearly what is the right thing to do. And, we are seeing a twisted version of what it means to do good works in the community, to walk with grace, to welcome the stranger, to feel our shared humanity and the common connection that we all have.
Let's go to Ann in Jamaica Plain. You're talking to Mayor Michelle Wu. Hi.
Hello. I'm interested in facts and data that are used to make policy decisions. I submit public records requests to the city to get these data, and I either get nothing for 6 to 8 months, or I'm told that they don't exist. For example, White Stadium contract bids from the spring were supposed to be evaluated and rated using criteria in the RFQ. So I asked for those evaluations, which are generally available to review after, and I was told they didn't exist. And then the Secretary of State asked the same question, again, told they don't exist. My question is, why is it so hard to get data that you're ostensibly using to make decisions? And specifically, why were there no contractor evaluations completed before selecting Bond to do the White Stadium work?
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann, for getting into the nitty-gritty with the public records requests and public records law. I will say we do need to do a lot more faster when it comes to responding to public records, and we've had to scale up the staffing and the capacity to respond to just an exponentially increasing number of requests under public records law. And it was only in very recent years that we've also started to, for the first time, use a provision of the law to request recoup some of the costs of. Sometimes we'll get requests that just require sifting through 20,000 pages, and so individual requests can end up taking a lot of time, and then everything becomes gummed up from there. So we have staffed up. We will continue to staff up on that front, but apologies on the timing of that. I know we need to do better on that. When it comes to the data that you're saying didn't exist, I think I would need to understand more specifically what exactly you're looking for. But by law, if there is a search term that you ask for, if there is a specific request that you tell us the words or the date or the topic, if it exists, we have to produce it. So if you're told it doesn't exist, that usually is, with that search query that you defined, we don't have responsive records. If there is, for example, an exemption, which is needed for privacy purposes or some other exemption that is carved out, they will still say that there are responsive records, but they cannot be released because of this or that exemption. So that's sort of the format of it. And then in terms of contractor evaluations, I will find out more on this question in particular. I know, again, we're governed by state public bidding law, and so the letter of the law is followed very carefully when it comes to responses that we get, and usually it is the lowest qualified bidder, and so that is the criteria that are used to make that designation.
Anna, is it okay to have her stay on the line and
Sure.
tell one of your...
Yeah.
Anna, if you
Happy to
stay
take
on the
more
line, we get your
details.
contact info, and Mayor Wu's office will be in touch and find out. Mayor Wu, Margie and I were we have Michael Curry on the show every week or two. He's head of the League of Community Health Centers and on the National Board, the NAACP. We were both at the 60th anniversary celebration for the league at the Kennedy Institute the other night, and you came in while your kids are running wild in the lobby or whatever they were doing. You spoke and talked about, if you don't mind, a situation with your mother in a community health center. Could you share that briefly with people?
Yeah, and I'll just say the thing about having 3 kids is that if you split them up, either you have to have one of them or you have 2 of them, and sometimes having 2 of them is actually better than the one because they keep each other entertained out in the hallway. So that was the situation I was under. It was the 60th anniversary, reflecting on the fact that Boston is home to the first community health centers in the country, and I just wanted to share my own personal the impact that my family has felt from this movement and the amazing people that keep it going under really difficult circumstances. That after my mom's schizophrenia diagnosis, there were multiple emergency room stays. There were multiple times where even when we finally got to interacting with the healthcare system in a place where I thought we'd be able to get help, it felt even worse after being there, that because of cultural barriers or the kind of structure and the way the system was carried out for someone who is experiencing mental illness, speaks a different language, comes from a different cultural background, felt really dehumanizing over and over and over again. And it wasn't until feels like a miracle, we got connected with the South Cove Community Health Center in Chinatown, that I remember sitting there with her in the doctor's office and hearing her talk for the first time to a doctor, a psychiatrist, in Chinese, and able to see her finally feel like she was herself, talking about her life and her situation. I'm still feeling very emotional at the sense of relief that brought. And I really believe, we would not be in the situation we are today as a family. I get to live in a 2-family home with my mom. She's, got her up and down days, but our lives were completely changed, saved, stabilized because of the ability to connect with a particular community through this amazing movement, bringing healthcare exactly to people who need it in the ways that actually make it accessible.
And we should say, as Michael has told us, they serve 1 million people in the Commonwealth, and obviously they're at great risk because of the Medicaid cuts that were passed by this Congress.
Okay, on a much less serious note than that, this Miles Howard fellow is complaining in the Boston Globe that we do have the Snowport down in the Seaport, and we do have the SOA Winter Festival. We don't have enough lights here in Boston. That's his complaint. He thinks that we
Lights?
need more. Yeah, we need more lights. That we don't have enough in Copley Square here. We don't have enough Atlantic Avenue. He wants us to look like Vienna, Prague, and Dresden in the wintertime. I don't know if you saw this piece, but what do you think the light situation is in the city of Boston?
I mean, Boston is beautiful in the winter, and lights are magical. When we after we do the Boston Common tree lighting, everyone scoots over to the Commonwealth Mall, and then we count down, and all of the trees along the Commonwealth Mall are lit up. And I remember I think it was 300,000 light bulbs that are required,
wow.
or some number like that. And it's a lot of coordination. It's a lot of fundraising that ends up happening from the Friends of the Public Garden in that case, but we do our very best, and it's often the business districts, the main streets, or business improvement districts that lean in and help us go above and beyond. It's a complicated, resource-heavy endeavor, and our Parks Department does an amazing job installing
How
our
many
streets.
trees are you going to light this holiday season?
I think we did 37.
37.
And
Okay.
a pirate ship, and a trellis, and
Okay.
menorahs.
Okay.
Why wouldn't
well,
you?
Mayor Wu, thank you very, very much for coming
Mayor
in.
Wu,
We much
thank you so much.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Merry
your time and
Christmas.
for coming down here to the library.